Position of the nation's retirement accounts. What solution do you recommend for Social Security?
Clearly, we are on a collision course with Social Security. We need to convey the message more appropriately that Social Security was never intended to be a retirement program, nor will it ever be. It shouldn't be. We need to engage consumers, citizens, to invest on their own, in addition to, in addition to what they are mandated to pay from the government. And we can bring about a better economic situation when people invest for their future. We need to keep all options on the table. There are a lot of things that can be done. Let's look at those, but let's make sure that I am in a situation to ensure that it's a public program. It is. I do not support privatization. We have other options that can be pursued to make sure that it's solvent and it has more folks involved and more aware that it's not a retirement program. But some of the demagoguery that's been taking place in Washington is certainly not helpful. And the longer we wait to reform, the more difficult the situation will become.
Ms. Davis?
I support maintaining Social Security, and I don't say that just because my mom turned 65 this month. In all honesty, I think Social Security has largely served our country well, and in terms of the funding behind it, there is a very simple thing that we can do to maintain its longevity and its funding. One thing that is true of Social Security right now is that for a person making over $106,000 a year, only the first $106,000 of their income is taxed on Social Security. If that were not the case, if we had uniformity in our tax code, we would have no problem with keeping Social Security solvent. I would support measures to make that happen. Beyond that, I do not support any efforts to try to privatize Social Security. I say that for multiple reasons, not least of all because I think the program right now has one tremendous strength. That is the fact that the actual overhead costs associated with Social Security are less than 1%. So over 99% of your tax dollars, of my tax dollars, that go into supporting Social Security actually end up being paid out in benefits. You don't see that. I know this sounds ironic coming from the federal government, but you don't see that level of efficiency in the private marketplace. So any policy that would support the privatization of Social Security, I would vote against.
Mr. Hill?
Okay. Yeah, Social Security is a big issue. Medicare is actually a much bigger issue. But, you know, what we've done with Social Security is we created a system of smoke and mirrors with the trust funds, and we empowered Congress to vastly overspend on budgets over the years, and so we have this fictitious bunch of money that we're going to that props up Social Security until 2037. Well, in fact, it's filled with debt. The government bonds are in there. So that's one of the reasons we're seeing larger deficits now is we're taking in less in tax revenues than what we pay out in benefits for Social Security, and we have to dip into the general fund to pay off those bonds in the trust fund. We wouldn't have had that problem if we had created individual accounts. When you have an individual account, you own it. So the government can't take your individual account, spend it, and put an IOU in there. We can't maintain the current system. It can't. It's impossible unless you're starting to talk about taking most of people's money in terms of taxes. We can't keep Medicare as it is. We can't keep Social Security as it is. So for my children, I would much rather see that they have individual accounts. Now, whether you call that privatization or the government holds those accounts, at least their name's on it, there's a quantity in it, and they've got something that they actually own. When you talk about doing things like raising, subjecting a higher level of income to Social Security taxes, if people didn't change their behavior, based on changes in the tax code, fine, that works, but they will. And high-income people have the greatest ability to change their behavior and their income. So anytime you change the tax code to, soak the rich, stick it to the rich, let them foot the bill, what you see is they lower their incomes because they can. And they'll do that to avoid taxes. So you tack another 15% tax on people already in the highest tax rates, we will actually collect less in income taxes and probably less in Social Security taxes, both, because they're not just going to sit there and take that; they'll change what they're doing. Let's see, and the fact that I'm sorry, I'm done.
Ms. Davis will start the next question.
This comes from the media. Many people in the nation and here in Nebraska and in the district are fed up, angry, confused, want to remove themselves from politics and the political process. What can you do to encourage and engage people to take part in events like this in public policy?
As I said earlier, we get the government we deserve. If voters know who the candidates are, what they stand for, and why they're running, good things happen at the polls. But it is a challenge to get people motivated to get out to vote. But one of those key aspects is changing the type of candidates that we send to Washington. I say this in fairness. I'm saying this as much about the Democratic Party as I am about the Republican Party. But I think one of the biggest sources of frustration that you just mentioned is that voters seem to think it almost doesn't matter if it's a Democrat or a Republican that they vote for, if that candidate has already been bought and paid for by special interests. That's why at the start of my campaign I made 2 pledges. The first was to spend meaningful time in each of the 69 counties of this district, and I've done that twice. I've been to every county once before the primary, once again before the general election, and many of those counties, including Custer County, I've been to multiple times. I did that not only because as a challenger I needed to build up name recognition, but because I wanted to reinstill a sense of integrity back to this process. We have had a history of some phenomenal representatives here in the 3rd District. A large part of why I'm running was my own frustration as a voter. It should be of deep concern to all of us when any candidate, whether that's our current incumbent in the 3rd District or anywhere, accepts special interest money on a scale that is measured in the millions. That's why my second campaign pledge, that I decided to refuse all special interest money. Sure, it makes it a challenge. When your bank account is 4 or 5 figures, that's a far cry from 6 figures. But you know what? I sleep just fine at night, knowing that the money that funds my campaign comes from individuals, many of which are seated at these 2 tables here. The fact that I could tell you, if you gave me enough time, the name of every donor to my campaign is something that I am deeply proud of.
Thank you, Ms. Davis. Mr. Hill?
I would say read my book. You'll be re-engaged. We do have a problem with politics. I've been a lifelong conservative Republican, and I'm disenchanted with both parties, including the party I've always supported. I don't think I've ever voted anything but Republican. We look back, and it's really about leadership. I don't think you develop leadership in politics. If you don't show up to a political office as a leader, you're not going to develop that over time, and it is something that requires development. Until 2007, when the Democrats were sworn in and took over Congress, for 12 years, the Republicans controlled the House of Representatives. The Conservative Party, the Republicans, controlled the House of Representatives 12 years. For 10 of those years, they controlled the Senate. For 6 years, they controlled the White House. During that time, there were a lot of lost opportunities. We had a couple of, 2 to 4 good years there, and really it was once we got the White House, once Bill Clinton was out of president, the Republicans kind of became like Democrat light, the light beer version of Democrats. Just as firemen run towards fires, real leaders run towards problems. We haven't even talked about the biggest problems of I'm kind of disappointed with the questions. We haven't talked about the biggest problems. And the Republicans have proposed, we're going to roll back spending all the way back to 2008. I mean, are you kidding me? That was yesterday. That's the best we can do. That's conservative leadership now, is to roll spending back to 2008. We've got to get much more serious and do much bigger things. I never heard Adrian Smith talk about cutting the Department of Education until I wrote it in my book. I haven't heard, criticisms of the Republican Party from Republicans. We got to talk about our own team. Can you imagine Bo Pelini, after losing to the Longhorns, saying those guys cheated and the refs set us up? That's not what leaders do. Conservatives need to challenge conservatives, and that's why I'm here.
Congressman Smith?
People are fed up. I've talked to a lot of them. In fact, many of them are scared. I have served 2 short terms in Congress, not in that Republican majority. I think it's a different experience.